Yeah, thanks for still being here. Well, I will make some general points before I go to specifically on Iran, but I will be as short as possible and also a bit polemical for the sake of discussion, contrasting to other ideas about strategies. First, three general points. I mean, it's easy to forget, I think, what is actually the most important issue when we are talking about strategy: revolution itself as being a strategy. I mean, this is easily overlooked, I think, but we all are acquainted, you know, to other forms of proposals of strategy. There are the liberal forms. Many universities have developed programs, research programs on them, on NGOs, building NGOs, civil society activism, and so on. And I know actually, working with some of those departments, that many of them are actually in kind of a identity crisis at the moment, you know, trying to push the idea of building civil societies. And then suddenly you have these mobs on the streets of the Middle East making a revolution, masses, taking things into their own hands. And I think this is really the rehabilitation of the idea of revolution as a strategy, and we shouldn't underestimate it. But it's of course not only the liberal opposition against the idea of revolution. There are also radical forms, which I would say, for instance, autonomist ideas against the concept of revolution. For instance, Negri and Hart, at the peak of the Egyptian revolution, actually wrote an article saying this has nothing to do with a revolution. This is the multitude, non-centered multitude coming together, and this is a new form of opposition, and so on. And I again think this, what happened in Egypt and Tunisia, actually shows why that's wrong, because in every revolution what happened, taking state power or challenging state power was the heart of the matter. It was central. Whether, I mean, look at what is happening in Libya, for instance, at the moment. You know, if you want to see a revolution taking place, that's it. I mean, who has the most powerful gunfire will win at the end. And I think, fortunately, we saw the leaving of Mubarak in Egypt without that kind of bloodshed. But then there is the question, of course, of how deep the revolution goes and so on. So first I would say, let's you know, rehabilitate the idea of a revolution and as a strategy. Second point is, I think, the importance of how democratic issues, not only in the Middle East but everywhere else, are linked with the issue of social questions of equality, fighting poverty, and so on. Because first of all, I think we should take democracy very seriously, as it was, because these are revolutions on dignity, of people wanting to live in dignity. But then again, in terms of having political freedoms, but also being free from poverty and inequality. So linking both issues is very important for two reasons. First of all, because there are real grievances in the Middle East. In Egypt, I think 44% of the people were living below the poverty line, being $2 a day. In a country like Iran, 20% of the population controls the half of the wealth, and I could go on. And these are real issues that have to be addressed if you really want to speak about radical change that benefits the majority of the population. And the second reason of linking these issues is, of course, agency. Who is going to be the social power, the social group, the social force that is going to push for these radical changes? I think, specifically looking to the Middle East, I think many of these states have created a state class. As I explained it about Iran, but I think this is also true on Egypt, with the military being part of that state class. This social class has no interest in really bringing radical changes in those countries. Then if you look to the private bourgeoisie that has been growing in those countries, partly because of privatization and liberalization, they have grown in dependency and appendage to the state. So they are actually very much linked to the state, and while they want to have more space for themselves, more room for themselves, they are very dependent on those states. For instance, for being protected against their foreign, Chinese, US competitors and so on. So I don't think there will be revolutionary forces in those societies. And then the middle class is very contradictory, to be honest. I think, of course, there are part of them wants political freedom, but then the contradiction especially starts when the social issues come into play. Whether it benefits them or not. Just to give you an example of Iran, for instance, actually the higher parts of the middle class has not been participating in the demonstrations and so on, because they actually can buy off the police, for instance, when they have their own parties with alcohol, with drugs and so on. They can buy off the police. So how even those kind of political issues affect the lower classes is very different than how they affect the upper middle classes. So I think that really leaves the working class and lower classes as the real social force that could bring these changes about. And I will leave that point at that, but only saying that I think this is really the strategy of permanent revolution, of how these democratic issues are linked to bringing genuine social change. Because if it doesn't happen, we will actually see what happened in Russia, which is now not really a democracy, but a crony capitalism with people around Putin. What happened in Indonesia, again, not a real genuine democracy, nor benefiting the majority of the population in Indonesia. Or look at South Africa, the same story. So it's really, I think, important to argue for this kind of radical strategy. And the third, maybe the most controversial argument would be the necessity, I think, for organization. Again, by referring to Negri and Hart, they actually said, you know, there was all about spontaneity in Egypt and Tunisia. Well, I think it is, of course, very much important of the masses taking into the street, the self-organization of the people. But there was actually organization. I mean, there was a decade in Egypt of struggles, of labor movements, of anti-war activists, and so on, taking onto the streets and organizing. The accumulated experience and organization which actually could participate in the revolution. And in Tunisia you had the trade union, etc. And I also would argue that the lack of organization actually explains the limits of the revolution, because it is very easy to topple a dictator, but it is more difficult to replace it with another system. Then you need organization, you need revolutionary party, you need arguments which actually push the revolutionary process forward. And that's, I think, where the need of organization comes in relation to spontaneity. I actually will leave it there and come back on Iran maybe in the discussion, because I think the time is for the floor.